All right, welcome everyone. This is the StatPREP teaching data-centric stats. This is a webinar on starting RStudios on Friday, October 27th, 2017, and we appreciate all of you being here. And we'll give you some information about RStudio and how it all fits together and connecting your GitHub account to the RStudio account also. So I'm Catherine Kozak with StatPREP, and Danny Kaplan is also here with StatPREP. And Danny, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Great. Well, first, just a word for those who might be watching on video in later days. This is the October 27th webinar, and despite, I don't know if you can see me, but despite the snow in behind me, this is still October. We're in the Minnesota hemisphere, and things work differently there. Our topic today is introducing RStudio. We're going to introduce it in a very document-oriented way. I think a lot of people first encounter it using R commands, which is great. But I think it's more important for one's overall productivity to look at it as a document management system, and that'll make sense when we talk about it. And like the other webinars, this one's going to have a roughly 30-minute presentation and then a clinic afterwards, so that as people leave this webinar, they can actually be able to work with the things that we've been talking about. If you're watching the video, of course, the clinic does not follow the video, but you would have to write to someone. So go to the RStudio site, look up this webinar, and you'll see some contacts that you can write to get help as you work through the materials. Okay, so let's start with that. In the last webinar, we made a little website, a little course website using a service called GitHub. And we're going to build on that now, but you don't need to have the GitHub working. If you do, from last month, then bring up a tab with your GitHub site, because we're going to go there towards the end of the presentation. But we're going to use GitHub and RStudio together. All right? And in particular, we're going to connect RStudio to GitHub in a way that lets you manage and maintain that website you created through RStudio, and also produce documents that you might use in your class or syllabi or whatever it might be. And there are some things you need to have in order to do this work. One is you need to have an account in an RStudio account. Now, you can install RStudio on your desktop or laptop or whatever. You may have an institution installing it. When you're connecting to GitHub, it's not always the case that what you need is on your laptop initially. And rather than spending the first hour being an introduction to how to install obscure software on your laptop, we've just set up a service on the web, the StatPREP RStudio service. And you can get an account by submitting the form that's there on the link under prerequisites. And we also have some guest accounts for those of you who are with us today and don't have an account and want to join on. So if you need an account, send a chat message to Kate, and then she'll assign you an account. They're labeled guest 15 through guest whatever, sequentially, Kate, and I'll tell you the password. And then you can use that for the next week or so, but then we need to get you set up with your own account so that what you do is permanent, okay? And if you don't have a GitHub account, that you can set one up. Don't do that now. We have a workaround for this seminar, but you'd want to set that up if you didn't do so at the last webinar, okay? So you're participating already. It's helpful to have a second tab open, which will have the RStudio server in it. So if you have an account, then open a new tab and go to statprep.org/RStudio. and log in using the account ID and password that you have. And if you don't have an account, text Kate, and she'll assign you one of the guest accounts to use for today. Or we can do that during the clinic. Okay? Can I get a sense of how many people have an RStudio account, the StatPREP RStudio account?
I have one.
That's Tracy?
Yeah, hi Danny, how's it going?
All right, is it snowing in Duluth too?
Yeah, in fact, I just came in from shoveling the driveway and like, oh shoot, 3 o'clock, we're already started.
Okay, well that's okay. So open up you've got one tab open for this webinar. Open up another tab for the statprep.org/RStudio and log in. And before we get into it, I want to remind you some things that we're going to do after the webinar. Of course, we're going to have a clinic session immediately following this live webinar, but we'll also be scheduling later clinic sessions a couple of weeks after each webinar so that people who couldn't make it to the webinar also have a chance to get some help. And remember that there's a hub leader, and you can get in touch with your hub leader for using any of the techniques that we're going to cover in this webinar. And you should also feel comfortable just writing to me or whoever your resource might be. But just feel free to write to me, and we can arrange a mini web conference if you've run into problems of some sort. And then really important for us, we need your feedback. Partly we need it to know from the participants' viewpoint whether things are working. Partly we need it because we have sponsors and they need to be able to make an informed judgment about whether what we're doing is working and how well. So there's a link there. You can fill out the short survey there after the webinar, but please do remember to do that. And I'll try to remind you at the end of the webinar, and Kate will certainly remind you as we get started.
Danny, before we get started, I do have somebody who needs an RStudio account, so do you want to email me how to do that?
Okay, so it's just one person, so call them guest 15, no dash, all lowercase.
There's actually 2 of them now, so where do I put that in?
That's what they're going to put in.
Okay, guest.
So tell each one whether they're guest 15 or guest 16.
And guest all lowercase, right?
Yep, so you don't need to log in.
Okay.
You just have to tell them what their ID is.
Okay. I will send that to Claire, and then I will send one to David also. Okay,
and then in a tremendous web security, the password for these guest accounts is polywog, all lowercase, dash, and then whatever the number on your account was. So for guest 17, it's polywog dash 17. No dash in the username. Okay, and so you can try that, but I'll go on and we can help in the clinic as we go.
Can you tell me the password again, just so I can send it to everybody?
Polywog, POLLYWOG dash, and then the 2-digit number.
Okay.
And for the video people, we've changed this already by the time you're watching it, so no such luck. Okay, so if you were able to log in, then you're looking at a screen that looks very much like this one in your web browser. And I'm going to go to the same screen in my web browser. This is a picture in the blog. There's my version of it. I've blown up the font, so it's a little bit easier to read. And the first thing I want to do is to orient you to RStudio. All right, so a thing to notice, this RStudio server lives in a tab in your browser. All right. Remember that it's in your browser, so if you have a Mac, for example, the menu up here, I don't know if you can see that, but the menu for the browser is not the menu you're going to use for RStudio commands. The RStudio command menus all follow this big blue R, and you can see there's the standard kind of words for the system menu, but they're the ones after the blue R, not the ones that go with your browser. And there are also some buttons here that do various menu-like things. Okay, are people able to see that? I'm not getting much feedback here because sharing the screen, I can't see anybody.
Yeah, I can see things.
Okay, hey Mark. All right, so two things I want you to pay particular attention to. One is at the far end of this menu bar is your user ID. My user ID is DT Kaplan, which is why that's what's showing, but you should have your user ID up. And then the other thing to note is this little menu that says project. And unless you've done something with your account, it will say project none because you haven't yet set up a project. We're going to do that later. In this webinar, we're going to set up 2 projects. And we'll talk more about what those projects are for. Now, the RStudio here is a tab in your browser. But let's just think of that tab as the whole window for RStudio. All right, I've got other tabs open in my browser too, but think about this tab as the whole window for RStudio. And windows, you know, are divided into pieces. They're called panes when you refer to physical windows, and that's the word that's used in RStudio here too. So for example, my mouse is going in a circle around inside one pane. And here's another pane. And here's a third pane. All right? So the window, the whole program, is divided up into parts. Usually there will be 4 parts, but we'll come back to that. Into parts called panes. And then each pane has something called, has things called tabs in it, just like the tabs in your browser. So right now, I'm circling the environment tab in this little pane, and I can shift to things like connections. I could if my browser responded. History. So there are some commands I tested out. Environment. And just a second, I have to fix my screen. Sorry. Thank you. All right. So remember that hierarchy of windows containing panes, containing tabs. And that's helpful when talking to people, because if someone says, go to this tab, and you're looking for a pane, it's going to be harder to find it. Okay, so there are 3 panes. You're looking at your own screen. The biggest one, which is on the left, unless you've changed it, has a tab called Console. And if you've used R before in RStudio, you're used to typing in the console. That's not what we're going to do today. And in fact, it's a good practice to try to minimize the amount of typing you do in the console. You'll see why. On the top right, you've got a tab, a pane probably displaying a tab named Environment. And yes, there was a question? Nope. In the bottom right, there's a pane with displaying a tab Files, although you might have changed it to something else. And in a few minutes, we're going to use the Viewer tab in that pane. And soon we're going to be creating a new pane, the 4th pane, 4th standard pane. That's for editing documents. So let me just ask if there are questions so far. That's a sort of geographic orientation to RStudio, the layout. If there are questions, and then we'll move on to our first project.
If you have questions, you'll need to unmute yourself. Danny, I can't seem to get David in.
Okay. I'm not sure whether I should go on or.
I would say go on and see if we can get David. David and I will try to see what we can do.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to my RStudio window. And what we're going to do.
Sorry, it is Pollywog, P-O-L-L-I-W-O-G?
Y.
Y, so it is Y, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so going back to RStudio, the first thing we're going to do is create a new project. And it's a good idea always to do your work in projects. It helps keep things organized, and it has other advantages. And the projects are free, and you can have as many of them as you want, so you don't have to be shy. But it is a good idea when you're working in art to do something other than the addition for your children's homework. It is a good idea to have a project open. So you can either go to the drop-down menu for project, or you can go to the file menu next to the big blue R and go to new project. I'm going to do that now. And I don't need to save this. Okay. So once you've hit new project, you should be looking at a menu like this. Okay. We're going to create a new directory project. Later today, we're going to do a version control project. That's to connect to GitHub. But for now, a new directory project. And it's just going to be a new project. And we'll call it, my browser will respond. We'll just call it, this is going to be a Scratch project for practice. Now, yes, notice I didn't put any spaces in the name. If I wanted a space, maybe I would have done that. That's all fine. Try to avoid having spaces in the names of your files when you're using R. In fact, when you're using anything, because spaces can lead to unanticipated difficulties. So I'm going to call this one for practice, and I'm going to create the project. I press the button, and I'm waiting. Okay, so the screen looks very much as it did before, except now, under my user ID, is the project for practice. And you have the whatever project it is that you created. Again, I'm somewhat disconnected from all of you. Can I get a sense of whether that's working?
It worked for me, Danny.
Good. Okay. Some people I can see. If you give me a thumbs up, then I'll know it's working. Okay, Tracy, good. Okay. So one of the tabs that you're going to use from time to time is this Files tab. And the Files tab lists the files that are in your project. Right now, there's only one, and it's one you're not going to directly use. So just leave it alone. This is a file that tells R what the settings are for your project. And so you can just leave that alone. We're going to be creating some other files in just a minute. So here's the Files tab. Your own directory is called Home. So each of you has your own home directory because each of you has an account. And then when I opened the project, it automatically created and put me in a subdirectory called For Practice. So this file is in home/forpractice/forpractice.rproj. Okay, you're going to be using the File tab from time to time. All of these files here are in the cloud. They're not on your computer. You can download them, but they're not going to be on your computer until you download them. And when you do download them, it will be a copy of what's in the cloud. So modifying the one that's a copy won't do anything to the one that's on the cloud. All right, go back to the notes. Sorry, I'm late. Things are just being very slow here. Okay, so what I thought we would do is create a handout for your course. All right, and I'll go through the steps listing them here, and then I'll work through them, showing them on the screen. Okay. So we're going to write a handout for your course, and to do that, you're going to go to the File menu and create a new file, and then you get several choices. You're going to create a new R Markdown file. And first thing to do is to save that new file, even though there's nothing you wrote in it. Just save it. And let's give it the name Lesson A, so we can all be talking about the same thing. And you don't have to give it a dot extension. That will happen automatically. And again, try to avoid spaces in the name. Okay. Now, the document you're looking at is a kind of template provided by RStudio. So it's a complete document. It just isn't the document that you want to be having. So later on, we're going to delete that and put in our own content. But whenever RStudio starts up a new file of this kind, it fills it in with some boilerplate, just an example of a working document. And to make sure that it works, press the little button above the document that says knit. It has a little knitting ball with a needle through it, and it says knit. All right. So I'm going to do all those things now, and then we'll come back to it. So here I'm checking. I'm in my for practice project. Of course, that's the only project I've got right now, but I'm in that project. I'm going to go to File, wait for my computer to tell me it's okay. Come on. File. New file, R Markdown. I'm going to call it Lesson A. This is the title in the document. And you can put for the author, you can put your own name, of course. And then I can't really see this yet, but let me just try it. No, I'm getting interference from Zoom. It's taking up too much of my screen.
Danny, I hate to bother you again, but we're still having trouble getting David on. So can you just remind me again, Pollywog is, how do you spell that?
P-O-L-L-Y-W-O-G.
Okay.
Dash.
Dash, okay.
Not slash or underscore, dash, minus sign.
Oh, okay. That's the problem. Thank you.
All right, just a second. Oh, here it is. Okay, I just can't see it because Zoom has put a window, helpfully, right in front of it. Maybe I can hide it. Okay, so here I have in a new pane, I've got a document that's currently called Untitled 1. Notice that the console tab, which was in a different pane, is still here, down here, but I'm working in the editing pane. And so I've got a document that starts with this kind of gibberish, but you can make sense out of that. That's something you don't want to change without thinking about it. All of those little dashes, they need to be there for a reason, but you don't have to worry about that reason. But just do leave them there. And then it has some stuff in it, which I don't really care about. But the first thing I'm going to do whenever I open a new document is go to the disk icon or the menu, file menu, and save it. And again, I'm waiting for this to come back. I'll take a break in a minute and see why I'm waiting. And I'm going to save it as lesson A. And now this is going to be the name of a file, so I won't put spaces in it. But lesson A, and when I hit return, it will save it. Now the tab is entitled lesson A, and it has put the extension for these markdown. R markdown is what RMD stands for. The system has put that on automatically. And the first thing I do after saving it is to press this knit button. So I pressed it, it does some work, and for me, I am getting a display of that document in my Viewer tab. Now, when you did it, it might show up differently. So did anyone have it show up differently? Not in the Viewer tab, but in the...
I had my pop-up
Mine
blocker
said
on.
pop-up locked.
Go into your,
Yeah, so
Okay.
you do need, I ran into the same problem. You do need to undo that, or Danny will show you a way to
I'm
do it.
going to show you how to do it. So your browsers are set up to open that new document in a pop-up window, and then your browser, however, whichever browser it is, either asks your permission or doesn't when it brings up such a new window. Well, I find it convenient to bring up the documents within one of the panes in RStudio. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to go to the Tools menu, and I'm going to wait because my browser's being very slow. And I'm going to go to Global Options. And inside Global Options, I have, all sorts of things. It's potentially complicated. Right now, I'm interested in R Markdown. And over here in the right, it says Show Output Preview In. And you probably have yours set to something different than to window rather than viewer pane. If you set it to viewer pane, I think you'll find it easier. You can always set it back if you prefer it the original way. Does that make sense? Okay, now I have to get rid of this menu.
Danny, when someone does that and it doesn't say R Markdown, what does that mean?
In this options list,
No,
Yeah, it's not there.
so it has general encode, but it doesn't have R Markdown?
Correct.
I'm thinking that you're not on the StatPREP RStudio server. You're on some other server? Or using your laptop?
I'm on the same address.
But it's not showing up. Well, I'm at a loss to explain why that would be. But so you'll have to just deal with the extra window, and then we can work that out during the clinic. Okay?
Never mind. You figured it out. Thank you, Colette.
What was it?
What was it?
It was on global options, not, I thought we were in project options.
You didn't go to global options.
Yes, you have to go to global options. That's a very good point. It's as if I paid you to make that point. You won't have to worry about project options right now. Okay, so I've got two versions of this document open now. In the upper left, I've got things which are just plain text, including some color and such, but just plain text. And in the lower right, I've got a rendering of that text into, in this case, HTML. We can create other kinds of documents either. So, for example, you can see that double hashtag R Markdown got turned into a big font boldface R Markdown. And the double star knit here got turned into a boldface knit in the rendered document. So that process of translating the document from its markdown format into another format, in this case HTML, is called compiling, which is just the computer science term for translating. But and we'll call it knitting. We'll knit the document in order to see the polished version. And why do you have to have a polished version? Well, you don't. But look at one thing before we erase it. This is an example of an R command. And it's asking just for the summary of a data set. Notice I didn't include any output from that command in the document. A good reason not to include output is that I might have cut and pasted into the wrong place, or I might decide to change the data set that I'm using. But in the Markdown, it's showing me what the outcome was.
That was weird.
And that's what happens when you press knit. In addition to translating the format, it walks through your R commands, evaluates them, and as you request, inserts them into the document. This means that your documents are reproducible. So if you discover a mistake, and who doesn't make mistakes, so when you discover today's mistake, whenever that is, you can fix it and then simply press knit to put the whole document together again. Right. So we're going to edit this in just a second, but I want to emphasize the workflow. The Markdown system is pretty good in terms of working despite something you might do, despite little errors, but it still is somewhat complicated. And the thing about it being complicated is that it doesn't mean you should run from it. It's complicated because it has to be complicated. It means that you should adopt tools and processes that make the complexity something you can deal with. So especially as you start, when you edit a document, take something that works. How do you know it works? Because you press the knit button and you could see that you've got something. Then make a small change, maybe add a paragraph, and then press knit again and verify that it works. And if it did work, rinse and repeat. And if it didn't work, well, you have a good reason to suspect that the reason it didn't work relates to the change that you just made. Okay? As you gain experience with this, and confidence especially, your changes won't have to be so small. But I do an awful lot of knitting just so that I can make sure that I haven't fallen off the path. I don't want to wander in the wilderness of not being able to find where a mistake was. Okay. Make sense? So let's edit this document. We'll leave all the stuff at the top in there and just get rid of all of the kind of human readable content like that. I've made a small change. What do I do next?
You just got rid of everything?
Knit it, exactly. All right. Now, admittedly, it's not a very interesting document. It just has the title and the author and the date in the HTML version, and nothing else appears because we didn't put anything there. So let's write just a pretend lesson for your class. I'm open to topics. What topic shall we make this example lesson? It's just going to be a very short one.
Just delete a little bit more. Okay, delete everything but the very top. Is there control Z? Is there an Z? Yeah, and Z works. Control Z.
All right. I'll call it the mean.
Except for that.
And here's where you'd put in your description of the mean. The mean is one of the most common statistics on a set of data. And then blah, blah. So you may actually write your lessons like that even without using the words blah, blah, blah. But here it's just because I want to show you the form of how you would do something. So I've made my small change. I knit. And now I've got my lesson. Now the text that I'm putting in here is simply Markdown, which means that you can do things like this. Today, we'll, 1, talk for a while, 2, talk some more, 3, rush to get something done. Small change, knit. And there I've got some enumerated points. Or if I wanted them to be bullet points and such, I could do that. If I wanted mean in italics, I can do that.
Yeah, it's like.
I can always knit to make sure I haven't broken anything. That's looking good. Okay? So that's the process of compiling RMD to HTML. You can compile to other things as well. So if you go to other formats as well, if you go to that downward pointing arrow next to knit, you'll see that the top one is knit to HTML. But if you'd like to knit it to Word, because you like to do things with Word, that's fine. Remember, editing the Word file will not edit the file that's on the server. So just for example's sake, I'm going to knit this to Word. Did it do that?
Danny, there's a question of, can you edit math like LaTeX?
Oh, what a great question. Of course, you can do that. I'll show you in a second. I'm just waiting for my computer to return. It's being really slow. And now it's giving me it's telling me there's a file, lesson A. And I'm going to download that, and then I could open it. And there it is, not very exciting. And this, of course, is a regular Word document that you could edit in any.
Danny, your file didn't show up of your Word document. It's, because all we're seeing is your.
Oh, because of the window. Well, trust me, I was editing a Word document. You'll know how to do that, and you can do that as you want. Good. And again, I'm waiting here for the browser to. So you can see the lesson A. So use Word if you like to use Word. I only use it for communicating with lawyers, but do note that if you edit the Word document, you will not change the original document that's in your RStudio account on the cloud. Right? Another thing you might do is knit it to PDF. And it's very much the same process. And I don't know if do you see this pop-up window I have?
No.
Okay, so a window just popped up, and if you do it yourself, you'll see it, which is the PDF version of the document. Let's work with that. It would be similar for the Word version. So the main point is that you can convert Markdown documents to other formats. And which format would you use? Well, HTML is what you'd use for the web. But if you want to print something out and hand it out in class, then PDF or Word is what you want to do. Right? I'm going to go to my Files tab here. And you see I've got all of these files, my original one, and then the 3 formats that I translated it into. Right? These 3 got generated automatically. This one, lesson A RMD, was the result of a huge amount of work on our part. So be careful that you don't delete that by accident. But let's say you wanted to print this out and hand it out in your class. How would you do it? You'd check the PDF version or the Word version. And then we go to the More menu, and I'm waiting for it to show up. And then there would be, nope, I'm looking for Export, Upload, Delete, Rename. I guess Export. Yeah, and then it will download it to your computer. And then you can print it in the normal way that you print things. It's just a file on your computer. Okay? Well, we're at the end of our 30 minutes now.
So before you finish up, Danny, will you show them how to do the latex?
Oh, how to do the LaTeX, thank you. Okay, so you go into your RMD document. I'm waiting, it's just very slow for me here. And then any math you want to put in, put between dollar signs. And it's important that the math touch the dollar sign on both sides. That's how it distinguishes LaTeX from money, which usually doesn't have dollar signs on both sides. And a nice feature, I don't know if you see it, there's a little pop-up over the window as I edit it that shows me what the rendered form looks like.
Oh, that's cool.
And if I compile it, oh, I just compiled it to PDF. That's not doing you any good, sorry. You can see my screen, but I can't. Okay, if I compile it to HTML to show in RStudio, I'm waiting. I have a little rainbow wheel of death here. I think that's because I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, probably.
I'm going to knit it to HTML so it shows up in my viewer tab. And I'm waiting for it to update. And there it is, the LaTeX typeset symbol. And of course, the whole thing,
So is that pretty much what LaTeX is then?
the whole thing is there for you. If however fancy you like your LaTeX to be, the whole thing is there.
That kind of LaTeX.
And use double dollar signs if you want a displayed equation. I don't think there's very many people who've learned what the mean is by looking at that equation, but sometimes equations are useful, are what you want to do. So because the amount of territory we could cover got us through this first project, not connected to GitHub. I'm gonna start to finish up the formal part of the presentation. During the clinic, we can talk about the other part of this, or it will be part of another webinar so that we can have a recording of it. So to go back to the beginning, remember after the webinar, we'll have the clinic right after this one, but also we'll have clinic sessions a week or so after the workshop. And if you just need help and you don't want to wait for a clinic session, and maybe it's just a simple question, get in touch with us. You've got a hub leader, and you can always write to me as well if the hub leader's not available. And absolutely important, click this link and fill in the survey so that we have something so we can find out how this was working and make it better next time. Well, that's it for me, Kate.
All right. Well, Danny, this is wonderful. You did a great job. And as I'm going to remind everybody again to please fill out the survey at that link. It really helps us to do these and to improve our webinars for future and see what changes need to be made. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and then we can go on and do the clinic thing and see
Right.
what's going. All right. So for those of you watching this, is the end of the recording, and you can always contact us for any help you need.